Hello guys, the events and story that we will be talking about today takes us to Tamaulipas. Tamaulipas is a Mexican state that shares the border with the United States. The state also has the reputation of being the birthplace of one of the most sadistic and evil criminal organization that the country has had. In fact, the rise of viral videos of the ones in the internet that you see of people being decapitated by cartel members was popularized in Tamaulipas, and the criminal organization that made those type of videos viral was a cartel known as Los Zetas. Los Zetas was an organization that was formed of ex-military personnel. These members of that cartel knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that by making these videos and making them popular, they would spread terror among their rivals and the general population. However, I'll move on to one of the many stories that happened in this country. The story comes to us from Milenio. And without saying more, let's start with today's story. This whole story starts from a photograph in Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas. The photograph you guys are seeing right now contains something that was very dangerous to public in the media. No journalist in Mexico dared to put it in a newspaper, let alone broadcast it on live television. As some of you may know, being a journalist in Mexico is one of the most dangerous jobs. So for this picture to be known to the general public, it had to go viral online. And what did this picture contain that made it so dangerous, you may ask? Because when you take a quick look, it just looks like another truck from a battlefield. However, the picture you're looking at was from a Ram that was stolen with plates from Texas and some letters that said La Tropa del Infierno. In English, it translates to the Troop of Hell. And once people started to see this picture, it came to light that there was a new armed wing for a criminal organization. This armed wing, known as the Troop of Hell, got its own fame, and the residents of Tamaulipas were terrified of them. Residents of Tamaulipas made claims that the Troop of Hell would roam the streets in bright daylight and with total impunity. Members of the Troop of Hell will roam the streets aboard armored vehicles. However, the story of the truck in the photo had a deep meaning. It is said that that same truck that was stolen from Texas was terrorizing Tamaulipas. One day, the Troop of Hell, using that same truck, started a shootout. After the truck was speeding and was going towards the airport, they skipped a checkpoint. The military, seeing that a truck was coming towards them at a high speed, they started a shootout with them. After the Troop of Hell ignored several warnings, the shootout was 6 cartel members being chased by 18 military members. The Troop of Hell was in a high-speed chase while the police were chasing them in 4 other vehicles. Both the cartel members and the police were using high-caliber guns. And we all know that the criminal organizations in Mexico sometimes have better guns than the military or police. But in that shootout between the Troop of Hell and the police, the numbers and training overwhelmed them. This gun battle, or this high-speed chase, lasted 8 kilometers. The 6 cartel members that were in the stolen Ram were unalive, while the police came out of that gun battle without injuries. More than a gun battle, this looked like an extermination. So the police started taking pictures of the gun battle. They didn't want to be accused of human rights violations. And the pictures that were taken that day showed a new criminal organization, and they started going viral. However, one picture from all of them was the most important, the one that went the most viral. The picture, I unfortunately can't show it to you guys, or fortunately, since it's pretty gruesome. However, I'll describe the picture to you guys. The picture contains 3 bodies. 2 of the 3 bodies are unalived. One of them is looking like he was trying to protect himself with the seats of the car, as if that was his last instinct to protect himself. But however, the one that the most people talked about was the third body. He was like the protagonist, like the main character of the story. And he kind of was the center of attention. Because if you saw that picture, you couldn't take your eyes off of him. The third body was sitting upright. He had his gun in his arms. However, he was completely missing his head. A bullet from the gun battle had got him right on his head. And another disturbing fact from this that the people started pointing, other than the fact that his head was missing, was that the body of that unalive cartel member looked to be of a very young person. However, it was very difficult to identify him with the fact that he was missing his head. So the prosecutor's office did their job. They managed to identify who was the third body thanks to his tattoos and some jewelry he was carrying. That cartel member was not just your regular member. He had fame and his name was Juan, but his nickname was Juanito Pistolas. Juanito Pistolas died in the battleground and he was just a kid of 16 years of age. And at that young age of 16 years, he was already known as a commander in his criminal organization known as the Troop of Hell. Juanito Pistolas gained fame after his death. There was a lot of tributes to him and a lot of people claimed to miss him. He even got a song made by a local rap group in Tamaulipas known as El Comando Exclusivo. In the song, they talk about his criminal career and how he was somebody to fear. Juanito Pistolas didn't leave nothing good in his life. Because if you search him up now in Google, you will just find pictures of him with guns. However, the story doesn't end here. Because when Juanito Pistolas was in the morgue, an officer recognized the body of Juanito. So he started searching, he started digging up. And he found out that Juanito Pistolas had already had a record. But since he was a kid, he would get a pardon every time. He would go into jail and he would come out. And his record started way back when he was 13 years of age. Since the age of 13, he was hanging out with sicarios in Tamaulipas. And it is presumed that at that age, he had already had a couple bodies. So it wasn't really a surprise for anybody to know that Juanito Pistolas got an invitation to form part of the new criminal organization known as the Troop of Hell. It is said that this group of mercenaries was created to be some form of kamikazes because they were always called up to do these impossible style missions. These missions were seen to be elite, or maybe they were more simple than they thought because they had kids doing them. So after the shootout and discovering the Troop of Hell, the government of Tamaulipas informed the country that there was a new militia full of kids and teenagers that were ready to terrorize the state of Tamaulipas, not only because of that gunfight with Juanito Pistolas, but instead because more bodies of teenagers and kids started to appear, and it became more frequent to see bodies of teenagers being killed by Mexican militias or Mexican police. However, the shootouts they had with these kids or teenagers weren't your typical shootouts. They were the most intense shootouts. But they weren't long shootouts. They were shootouts that lasted for a couple of minutes. And that's because most of them didn't know how to use their weapons. It was literally a war between kids and adults. However, the fact that these teenagers would get unalive quickly didn't mean that they weren't harmless to the police, because these teenagers would use high caliber guns that would carry a lot of bullets. I'm talking about if you shoot 100 bullets, one of them is gonna hit. The Troop of Hell managed to maintain their reputation of being some type of killer mercenaries. And the governor of Tamaulipas, Francisco Cabeza de Vaca, would throw jabs at them and shade. He would call them some kids that were hyped up, not by their parents, but because of a criminal organization. He would say these kids are trading loyalty for some clothes. And a lot of these kids were given trucks with the logo of the Troop of Hell. So it was basically a bunch of kids rolling around in some trucks with the logo of the Troop of Hell. And they would be so hyped up. They would be violent. They wouldn't care. And they would kill you if they want it. And the sad truth about the case of Juanito Pistolas is that he wasn't the first one nor the last kid to be in these cartels. Mexico published a study that claims that around 250,000 kids or girls or teenagers are at risk at being forced to become some type of sicarios, narcos, or work for a criminal organization like that. Sometimes they forcibly get recruited, like literally an organization would force them to work. Or the other sad truth is that some of these kids live in such poor conditions that they have no other choice but to join these criminal organizations. They get brainwashed into living a life that they will never live because they come from nothing, literally. And Juanito Pistolas wasn't missed at all in the Troop of Hell. In fact, he was replaced quite quickly. And who was his replacement? Another kid with the name of El Bracket, or in English, his name is literally the Braces. And who was his right hand man? Another kid who was being called El Ping Pong. If you notice the pattern, these nicknames are for kids. And the story of Juanito Pistolas repeated itself with now El Brackets. That kid disappeared and authorities never found him. And that cycle kept repeating itself in the Troop of Hell. A kid will die and he will be replaced by another kid. So the military of Tamaulipas, being used to these shootouts, started making an inside joke and started calling them the colorful chicks. This referring to the chickens or baby chickens that you buy at the fairs in Mexico. If you are from Mexico or you ever visited Mexico and gone to a fair, you know that they sell these like baby chickens that are like painted, and they like you buy them and they usually die in like a couple of days because you know they're like painted or they're abused. So that's why the military started calling them colorful baby chickens, because they would die in a couple of days and then they'll get replaced and die in a couple of days. The Troop of Hell eventually fell off, especially after its leader got caught. It was like a school without a teacher. These kids didn't know what to do without him. The Troop of Hell eventually was no longer heard of. But the damage has already been done, and the light has come to it that a lot of these kids in Mexico are being forcibly recruited to a criminal organization, or sometimes they join them because of the poverty or the family they come from. With this being said, this has been the time the Troop of Hell was terrorizing Tamaulipas.